Hello, this is Dr. James Camp from Lee College in Baytown, Texas, and this is the second part of my presentation on engineering ethics. This time we'll be talking about ethics specifically for engineers. If you recall, we introduced a moral ethical pyramid last time that started with moral ethical theories at the top, such as utilitarianism or common morality. What we want to do today is build down to general ethical principles that apply more specifically to engineering situations, specific ethical rules, which apply even more specifically toward day-to-day situations that engineers might deal with, and eventually talk about how we can construct a framework for making individual judgments and actions in an ethical situation. So first, before we get to ethics that are specific for engineers, there are four general principles that the bioethical world has developed that might also apply to engineers. And I just want to talk about, these stem sort of from that ethical theory of common morality that those of us who are involved in bioethics all kind of generally agree that it is a moral duty for doctors, medical researchers, etc., to stick to these ethical principles. The first is called autonomy, and this means that a person's actions and choices, should promote and not impair the ability of other people to make their own informed decisions and choices. So from a medical point of view, this is the idea that a doctor should always give you full disclosure of the possible benefits, but also the possible side effects of any course of treatment, and that the person should be free, the patient should feel free to choose whether they want to take part in that treatment or not. And this is especially important in medical research, where we don't always know the benefits and the possible side effects of a treatment yet. We're doing research to find that out. So we need to tell the patient as much as we know and leave the patient complete autonomy to decide to participate in the study or not. As engineers, this comes into play in many other ways. When we design a device, sometimes we have a particular way that we want to use it, but we want to make that device as open and customizable as possible so that different people have autonomy to decide how to use it. Apple, for example, has been pretty roundly criticized throughout the history of the Mac OS and iOS product lines for deciding ahead of time that there's one way to do particular tasks and not letting people customize the interface very much. If you take the far opposite extreme, if you've ever used the Linux operating system, it is entirely customizable. Everything from what graphical interface you install on your computer to what underlying programs it uses to do particular tasks is entirely customizable by the user, and most of those programs also have huge lists of preference statements that you can alter to change the behavior of your operating system. So that's an example of engineering autonomy. Some of the best devices are those that were designed particularly for one purpose, but people have ended up finding other ways to use them. The people who designed duct tape would never have imagined that it would end up getting used to make wallets. The people who designed Adobe Photoshop have repeatedly said that they're really surprised at some of the uses people put that software to, because they've made the software so open and allowed so much user autonomy in how to use its tools. A second pair of ethical principles go together. The first is called non-maleficence, and that's a big Latin term that basically means do no harm. It's the Latin translation of Google's old motto, don't be evil. And the other side of that coin is beneficence, and that is to actively do good in the world. If you are non-maleficent, it means that you work very hard at doing nothing that could harm anyone. And this is the Hippocratic oath that doctors take, is that they will do all the good they can, but first they will do no harm. And so if a patient comes in and there is no chance of curing their disease, but you could do you could give some sort of treatment that might have a serious side effect to it, you would not want to do that treatment because you're not doing any good and you're doing some harm to the patient. On the other hand, if, as is usually the case, there's a playoff between the treatment would cause some good, but it also has some negative side effects, you have to balance your beneficence and your non-maleficence. And that ultimately cycles back to autonomy. The patient has to be part of the decision to do or not to do that treatment. But where do these come in engineering world? Well, we might have a particular course of action that we want to do as a civil engineer, but we know that it will have a serious negative impact on the local environmental quality to put this dam in place, or to put this bridge over this particular river in this particular place would cause serious erosion of the riverbed, or who knows what. That falls into that first do no harm category. Engineers should be very careful to pick the course of action or the option when you've done all of your design work and come up with multiple design options. You should try to pick the one that does the least harm to the environment, to the people involved. Another example is a freeway that goes through a neighborhood. There are several examples in modern civil engineering history. Houston itself has one of the Interstate 610 loop running through the middle of Bel Air, which has divided that city into two halves that really have no interaction with each other anymore. That does some harm. So you have to weigh whether you are causing harm to others against the beneficence of, are you actively helping more people? And this ultimately comes down to a utilitarian kind of calculus of, is the harm I do more important, or is the good I do more important? Sometimes there are things like the Samsung battery fires where there was no good that came of it, and it's simply a matter of through negligence, through carelessness, through not testing enough, whatever it was, they ended up doing harm to their customers, and that would seriously fall into an ethical violation. Justice is the last of our 4 ethical principles we can import from bioethics. There are 2 halves to justice. The thing most people think of when they think of justice is the equality equity debate. If you've seen this, these memes going around the internet, there's this idea that giving people equal opportunity is not always the same as giving them equity of results, equity of outcomes. That would, a medical example would be that if we give everyone equal doses of medication, the medication doesn't interact with their body the same way. What we really want is equity of outcome. We want the same benefit to the patient, and so we have to carefully titrate the dosage until we get the appropriate treatment outcome. An example in engineering would be that if we built a pedestrian bridge across a river, and it across a streetway or something like roadway or something like that, and we built a series of stairs up to this bridge, that's giving everyone equal opportunity to climb the stairs, but it's it's not giving equity of outcome because not everyone can access stairs as easily. So remembering to put in an alternative, a ramp or an elevator or something that works with people who have mobility impairments is important for justice. The other half of justice, though, is that you need to fulfill obligations to those who have a legitimate claim on you. That is, if you sign a contract with an employer, if you sign a contract with a client, those people now have legitimate claims on your help, on your assistance. And it is only just for you to fulfill those obligations. You don't want to send a substandard product to a customer. That's not doing justice to the contract that you signed with that client. You don't want to give less than your full effort to your employer, because that's not doing justice to your contract with them. Okay, so those are some ethical principles that weren't developed for engineers, but might, I think, apply. Another way of looking at the ethical principle landscape is to look at personal moral ethical principles. I built this graphic from ethics that were turned in by one of my engineering classes. At the bedrock bottom level of this diagram, there were two essential ethics that this class of engineers thought should apply to all engineers. One is honesty or integrity, depending on how you want to look at that. Integrity sort of includes honesty, but it's important to note honesty as a separate value there. And the other is respect for others. If you're an engineer who develops any kind of device or infrastructure or service that affects others, you need to respect the people that you are impacting with your design. We can move up a level, and honesty and integrity break down into some words: responsible, accountable, trustworthy, hardworking, and then those break down further into loyalty, okay, to, again, your employers or your clients, objectivity and truthfulness. This is a very seriously important value for anyone in the sciences, and engineers are applied scientists, is that you have to deal with the facts. You cannot lose your objectivity in your hope that you will come up with a better solution, or that your favorite design idea might end up being the one that gets chosen. You have to look at the facts and say, okay, my favorite design idea just doesn't work as well as this other one, which is a little uglier, but it works better. Quality and rigor, that is similar, that you want to develop the idea that has the most, the highest quality to it, and you want to be rigorous in implementing quality standards. And legality, this group of engineers seemed to feel like staying on the legal side of the law was an essential moral ethical principle for engineers. And I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying that they considered that an important one. It's worth noting that legal and moral are not always overlapping. Okay, Jim Crow laws were legal, but they were immoral. So you have to be careful when you try to say that legality is part of your morals and ethics, that you evaluate each law and decide whether you think the law is just, is moral, is ethical, or whether you need to put effort into trying to change the law instead of just following it blindly. Okay, on the respect for others side, we had two really important ideas. One was good of the public, which leads to a belief in health and safety as important engineering ideals. Okay, and equity and fairness, justice. We talked about that on the previous slide. And also coming off of good of the public and equity fairness is environment and sustainability that we need to, so we need to treat the health of the public, the safety of the public, and also the health and safety and sustainability of the environment as important ethical obligations for engineers. Okay, so those are a couple of ways of getting at engineering ethics. Now I want to tell you what the so-called experts have decided. This is the National Society of Professional Engineers Code of Ethics. This is a set of fundamental canons, they call them, which is essentially the same idea as ethical principles that all engineers should follow. The first, and this should sound familiar to you from our past couple of slides, is that engineers should hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. So, and in public, I think we can include the environment as well as the people, the humans in that environment. Perform services only in areas of their competence. Okay, and I've added emphases here that are not in the original code with my italics here, but if you're performing services only where you are competent, that means that's an integrity issue. It's also a safety and welfare issue, because if you're not sticking to your competence, you may make, by definition, incompetent statements or incompetent judgments that might impact the public, the clients, the users of your device, etc. Issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. This falls into that honesty ethic, and also that that objectivity ethic that we were talking about with engineers needing to stick with their scientific facts. When you are speaking as an engineer, okay, now this doesn't mean that you can't go as a private citizen to a political rally and give a statement about your opinion on a candidate. But if you were speaking in a formal capacity, as in your capacity as an engineer, okay, if you are called to the podium and said, this is so-and-so professional engineer from such and such company, when you're there as an engineer, you can only speak in an objective and truthful manner. You can't give your personal opinions. You can't give statements that bend the truth a little bit or spin things one way or the other. You have to stick to the facts. And that is why typically, if you hear engineers get up at public board meetings, if you go to the Houston Metro board and you listen to engineers get up and give statements about the candidate design for a new bus line or a new rail line or something like that, they sound awfully dry and sometimes tedious or boring, but that's because they're striving to stick with just the facts and be objective and truthful. Act for each employer or client as faithful agents or trustees. This goes to that loyalty thing, and also that idea I said about justice being that you have a just obligation to people who have a claim on you. So if you have an employer, if you have a client, you are to be a faithful agent or trustee to them. That also implies a certain amount of confidentiality. Lawyers and doctors are not the only people who have to be confidential. Engineers should take pains to not disclose designs that go for a specific client, or specific things that have been disclosed by a client about their perhaps as yet unreleased designs. Avoid deceptive acts. Okay, that seems like a pretty all-inclusive one right there. Okay, we should avoid doing anything that makes somebody think that we've done something we haven't, that makes somebody think we are more confident in our design than we actually have reason to be. So all of those, a lot of the things we've said already kind of fall into this category. And then finally, engineers should, this is kind of an umbrella statement here that I personally think is one of those things that is so wordy as to really mean very little at all. Conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. What this says essentially, if you boil it down, is that you are not to act in such a way that you would embarrass your fellow engineers. Okay, that any engineer should act in such a way that any other engineer would be proud of them, and happy to call them a fellow engineer. Moving down the pyramid, we have specific ethical rules, which are also called ethical obligations. These are more specific statements that include phrases like shall or shall not, and describe specific circumstances, certain situations, areas of work or life that come up fairly often, and try to give you more specific guidance. Each of the engineering canons that we just described has a set of rules of practice that go with it. And I'm not going to read all of these because, my God, that would be tedious and boring. But there are a few that I want to point out. If an engineer's judgment is overruled under circumstances that endanger life or property, they shall notify their employer or client and such other authority as may be appropriate. Okay, that means you are ethically obligated to be a whistleblower. If you design an O-ring for the space shuttle, and you know that it's not going to work in these circumstances of the particular launch that's going to happen, and your judgment is overruled, you're not supposed to say, oh, well, not on me anymore, and watch the shuttle blow up. You're supposed to notify any employer, client, or other authority as you can think of to try to get that launch scuttled and save the lives of the astronauts on board, which did not happen, obviously, in the example that I'm giving here. We mentioned conformity with applicable standards. That's sticking with legal ideas. Engineers, we mentioned confidentiality. Engineers shall not reveal facts, data, or information without prior consent. Engineers shall not aid or abet the unlawful practice of engineering. So you will not hire a person who is not a lawful engineer. You will not help them practice engineering without a proper license. Engineers having any knowledge of any alleged violation of this code shall report to professional bodies, public authorities, cooperate with public authorities. So again, you have an ethical obligation to be a whistleblower. If you know that somebody is acting unethically in your engineering enterprise or in another engineering enterprise, it's not a matter of you don't want to be a tattletale. This is a matter of public safety, that you blow the whistle on this person and let the appropriate authorities know that somebody is doing some work that might endanger the safety, health, or welfare of the public or the environment. What about performing services in the area of your confidence? This one's a little simpler. You have to be qualified by education or experience in the specific technical fields involved. Okay, and that's pretty broad, education or experience. If you were trained as a chemical engineer, but you've done mechanical engineering work for 20 years, then somewhere along that way, you kind of became a mechanical engineer. So that became one of the areas of your competence. Engineers shall not affix their signatures to any subject matter in which they lack competence, okay, or to any plan or document not prepared under their direction and control. So that means both that if you're a licensed professional engineer in chemical engineering, you won't sign off on an electrical device. But it also means that if you're a chemical engineer and you're asked to sign off on a chemical design that you didn't have any role in developing, Okay, it wasn't under your direction and control, you're still not supposed to sign off on it, even if you can look at that and say, oh, well, yeah, it looks sound. And each technical segment must be signed and sealed only by the qualified engineers who prepared the segment. Okay, objective and truthful statements. The key statement here is engineers may express publicly technical opinions that are founded upon knowledge of the facts and competence in the subject matter. Keep coming back to the same ideas, folks. You have to base what you're doing on facts, and you have to have competence in your subject matter. Again, if you're a chemical engineer and you're asked to come get up and give testimony or a public technical opinion on a new battery design, maybe you do have competence in the chemicals involved in that battery design. Maybe you don't. You need to be an objective judge of whether you have that competence or not. If you're asked to design, to give commentary on the charging hardware, the electrical hardware that connects to that battery, you do not have competence in that subject matter. You're a chemical engineer. So even if you were involved in that design work as a chemical engineering consultant or something, you can't give a public technical opinion because you're not technically competent in that subject matter. Faithful agents or trustees. One of the big things that comes up here is conflicts of interest. Okay. You shall disclose all known or potential conflicts of interest and let other people decide whether you need to recuse yourself from that project or that part of the project or not. You shall not accept compensation from more than one party for services on the same project. So you can't be working on a bridge over the river, getting paid your salary paid by the city, and then also accept compensation from the engineering contractor who's trying to bid to build the bridge. Okay, that's a conflict of interest. That's not acting as a faithful agent or trustee. And if you work in public service as a member, advisor, or employee of a government body or department, you shall not participate in decisions with respect to services solicited by private or public engineering practice. Okay, so again, you can't put yourself in a position where you're working for two employers at the same time. Okay, where one person is you have an interest in a government project, but you also work for the company that's trying to solicit the bid. Okay. Avoiding deceptive acts, falsifying your qualifications, misrepresenting your qualifications, also contributing in any way to influence the award of a contract, offering any gift or valuable consideration to secure work, means you can't even take a government employee out for dinner to say, here, let me talk about why you should hire me. Okay, that's giving compensation, and that's a deceptive act. Okay. Half a step down the pyramid, we have ethical obligations. These help us apply these ethical principles to day-to-day lives. These are not based on the fundamental canons. These are another set of things that are considered less in the realm of universal ethics and more in the realm of professional duties of an engineer. Honesty and integrity. Striving to serve the public interest. And note that this is the only place where the NSPE specifically mentions environmental or sustainable development, protecting environmental quality on the natural resource base. Engineers shall avoid any conduct or practice that deceives the public. Engineers shall not disclose without consent any kind of confidential information. Okay, so there's that confidentiality as a professional obligation. Shall not be influenced in professional duties by conflicting interests. And shall not attempt to obtain employment or advancement, that is even asking for a raise, by untruthfully criticizing other engineers or by improper or questionable methods. So you can only, if this were a political saying, scene, we'd say you could only run on your record. You can't slander the other guy. Imagine how American politics would be changed if all politicians followed this this one ethic here, that you could only talk about your strengths and your record of achievements, and you couldn't criticize the other guy. But so you can't criticize the other engineers who work with you. You can't criticize the other engineers when you're trying to get a bid for a public contract, and you can't do anything improper or questionable, such as accepting part-time work or doing your own work using your company's equipment, supplies, etc., to carry on a sort of private practice at the same time. Going with that, you shall not attempt to injure maliciously or falsely, directly or indirectly, the reputation, practice, or employment of other engineers. If you believe, at the same time, if you believe others are guilty of unethical or illegal practice, you shall present such information to the proper authority for action. So this kind of tries to play both ways here, that you can't slander another engineer if they're practicing legitimately, but if you happen to know that they're unethically or illegally practicing engineering, then you have an obligation to blow the whistle on them. And engineers shall accept personal responsibility for their professional activities. So you will conform with state registration laws, and you shall not use association with some other entity as a cloak for doing unethical stuff. Okay, you have to say, look, it's my design. I take responsibility for it. I stand behind it. If I was negligent in any way, I am responsible for the damages. And engineers shall give credit for engineering work to those of whom credit is due. Okay, this is the intellectual property obligation. Whenever possible, name the person or persons who may be responsible for your designs, your inventions, your writings, other accomplishments. If you use designs supplied by a client, recognize that those designs remain the property of the client. You can't go use them for somebody else's project just because you happen to have access to it. And before you start making improvements on designs that you get from other people, you need to enter into a positive agreement regarding the ownership. You have to actually take ownership of the idea before you start making improvements that you might copyright or patent yourself. And finally, designs, data, records, notes referring to an employer's work are the employer's property. You cannot take your design work that you did for company A and go out on the market and sell it to company B. You can't go out on the market and start your own company with it. And so because that work is your employer's property. And there's probably a clause in your contract that says something to that effect. Okay. Finally, we land at the base of our moral ethical pyramid, individual judgments. We need an ethical decision-making process that helps us apply these ethical principles and rules to our day-to-day lives. And I've come up with a series of steps that you can go through, 7 steps to arrive at a decision. The first is to simply ask a goal question. Is this a worthy goal? Okay, is there a good why for why we should do it? The second is to ask a process question. Is there something unethical about how we will do it? Okay, this gets away from utilitarian ethics and gets into that question of just, is there a moral or immoral aspect to something we're doing? Is there an under the table kind of aspect to what we're doing? Context, okay, who and what are we impacting with our decision? That gets to that public health and safety and the health and safety of the environment. Facts, but also context refers to our clients and our employers. Are we impacting them with our decision? Our co-workers? Facts. At this point, once you've established that there's a worthy goal and the process is okay, and that the context is something that's going to be doing more good than bad to people around you, you should ask a fact question. What do we know and what don't we know? And it's possible that 3 and 4 should be switched now that I'm looking at it, because it's hard to tell who we're impacting if we don't actually know all the facts in the situation. So you may find in your actual practice that steps 3 and 4 need to be switched. That's fine. Values. Who are the stakeholders and what do they each value? So we can decide whether we're providing value to each of the people who are impacted by this decision. That's sort of related to the context question. Again, suggests that maybe 3 and 4 should be switched. 6, we finally get to our code of ethics. Okay, once we've decided that that there's a worthy goal, the process is okay, the facts stand on the side of going ahead with this, and the context and values indicate that we're doing more good than harm to the people who we're affecting with this, we should do one last check through our code of ethics and see if there's any parts of the NSPE code that come to mind that bring any warning bells about this situation. Okay. Finally, step 7 really applies to anything that comes out of this first 6 points with a no. Okay, that anything that warns us that maybe this isn't ethical, we can ask a possibility question. We are engineers. Our job in life is to solve problems. So just identifying that there's a problem isn't good enough. We need to think, is there a way we can engineer our way out of this ethical dilemma? Okay, are there other solutions, for example, that we haven't considered? If your 2 choices seem to be outsourcing to a sweatshop or losing to the competition because you're paying union wages, is there a third way? Can you figure out a way that you can either renegotiate with the union or put in some automated, more automated work, robot labor or something that cuts your labor cost? Is there any way that you can stay competitive but stay ethical at the same time? Eventually, you arrive at a decision, and the decision is not necessarily yes or no because of step 7. Sometimes step 7 indicates that the decision is we don't do it the way it was originally proposed, but here's a new proposal for a better solution to the problem. And you should have an ethical evaluation by the time you've reached your decision based on steps 1 through 7 that indicate why you think your decision is the ethical decision. Okay, so let's look at some individual cases and see how we apply those steps to looking at ethical cases. Okay. The first scenario, you're a chemical engineer working for a plant that is losing money on a product. The company thinks it could make product if it could avoid expensive disposal of a byproduct gas. Your plant manager suggests that you could simply vent the gas into the air on days that have strong winds that carry it away from your locality so it wouldn't show up on the government EPA sensors for very long. So you'd only get fined for a brief lapse in air quality, and you're being legal. You're paying the fines. You're not doing anything illegal. You're just possibly doing something unethical. Do you go ahead with the requested redesign? This is one that I think fails the first test. Is this a worthy goal? Saving your company a little profit, saving your company a little money, making a little bit of a profit by polluting the environment is not, in my mind, a worthy goal. Now, that's my bias. I think the environment is more important than corporate profits. Now, if this was my job, and it was my job on the line, and they said, you make a profit on this product or you lose your job, I would still not say that venting the gas into the air is the right solution. I would skip on down to my step 7 and say, can I re-engineer this in such a way that we can make money off of it? Maybe the byproduct gas that we're currently disposing of is valuable to somebody else. Maybe if I shop around the world, I can find somebody who wants this gas and we can sell it. Or maybe I can find, if I do some research in my local engineering library, I can find some uses for this gas that we could put it to, or some chemical reaction that converts it to a less hazardous, less toxic byproduct, or something that doesn't have to be disposed of in such an expensive way. So there are ways to engineer around this, but I think this one fails the goal test. Okay, you're chief engineer for an overworked building inspection department in a growing city, and you have to order your engineers to do less thorough inspections in order to fit them all in. You don't have enough inspectors to do the whole job. You're offered more budget to hire enough engineers to do the inspections properly if you'll sign off an order to let certain buildings, which happen to belong to businesses that contribute a lot to the city's bottom line and the mayor's reelection fund, you let those certain buildings be inspected under an older, less strict version of the code called grandfathering. Okay, do you do it? This is common practice, grandfathering in old businesses and things like that. But is it ethical? Our first question, is it a worthy goal? Well, the worthy goal is to hire enough engineers to do the inspections properly. That seems worthy. But the process seems unethical here. We're being asked to sign off on an order that sort of gives a certain privilege to companies that have contributed a lot to the city. That seems like if you pay enough, you don't have to be safe kind of situation. So I think in this case, I would again skip down to my step 7 and say, is there any way we could re-engineer this? Could we grandfather in all, hold a public vote maybe even to apply a less strict code to all the buildings that have already been built or that were built before a certain date, and a more strict version of the code to any new buildings or building improvements. And so if these businesses ever want to expand, they have to fit themselves up to the more strict version of the code. I don't know. That might work. That might not. But the point is, I think this was a process question. This is one that just something shady seems to be going on here. You work for a company that's having trouble competing on the price of its major product because its manufacturing plant is due for major renovations to keep up with environmental and safety codes. But you could avoid that expense and even lower the price of your product if you do what everybody else does and outsource your work overseas. The environmental regs, the safety regs, the labor costs, all lower, but you would cost your community a large number of jobs, and you would end up hurting the laborers overseas and polluting more. So there's an ethical component here. Our first thing, is this a worthy goal? Well, assuming that your product is something that improves lives, that you believe in your product, then continuing to sell the product and be able to compete on price seems like a worthy goal. However, and there's nothing shady here. We're being open with everybody about our plan, that we either have to rebuild the manufacturing plant or we have to outsource the product. So this, I think, is kind of a context question. Who are we impacting with this decision? We're impacting the environment. We're impacting the workers in our town. We're impacting the workers overseas who would have to work in a factory with worse safety regs and lower labor costs. So here we'd say no to either just rebuilding the plant for an enormous expense or outsourcing it as written, and skip down again to step 7 and say, how can we re-engineer this? Possibly we could build a state-of-the-art plant overseas that does have good environmental, does observe good environmental policies and good safety policies, but just happens to be lower cost because we built it overseas. That still hurts the people in our community. So maybe another option is we could rebuild our current plant with high-tech robotic labor that lowers our labor costs a little bit, and retrain our employees so that they know how to run and operate the robotic labor force, which gives them a better job, honestly, than just being a cog in an assembly line. You've been offered a job with a biotech firm. Okay. There's a genetically modified crop whose fruit produces more nutritious food, whose stems, which usually get thrown away, can efficiently be made into biofuels or bioplastics, and which has a special gene that makes it not require sprayed pesticides. So it seems like a really technologically advanced product. Farmers will make profit from the sales of the stems, and they'll save money on pesticides, but in order to make a profit, your company has to charge for the seeds. And those seeds will cost so much up front that small farmers who don't have much in the bank will have to take out a loan. And then if you have a bad crop year, if there's a flood or a drought, that could ruin the family farm. Also, local environmentalists are protesting every farm that plants GMO crops because they just believe that GMOs are evil. So while the company believes that their product is better for the environment than conventional crops, you're starting out with bad PR. So in addition to the duties of helping develop this product, you're being asked to help recruit farmers to plant the seeds. So you're going to have to be a salesman for the farmers and to issue public statements refuting the environmentalists. Is it ethical? I think this comes down to a facts question. What do we know? What do we not know? We know, assuming that our company is being honest with us, that we do get better food out of the product, that we do get benefits out of recycling the stems, and that we're saving pesticides. So, we've got all sorts of benefits here. What we don't know is what the weather is going to do this year. Okay, we don't know that our farmers will definitively grow enough product to pay off the loans that they have to take out for this product. And we don't know that the local environmentalists don't have a valid concern that there might be some other side effect of our product that they know about that the company isn't telling us. So we have to say, well, we will take the job, but we're going, let the company know we're going to issue public statements as the code says, based only on objective facts and truthful assessment of our product. Or we have to say, I'm just not comfortable sticking up for this product with not knowing more about it and decline the job. Uh, Personally, I think I would take this job, but I would insist on knowing more about the product, knowing all the facts before I go out and talk to people. And I might push for the company to give first-year discounts to farmers who are taking a chance on this crop so that they have a better chance of making a profit their first year. Okay, last week you shipped a sample of a product to a customer. They liked the sample and they asked for their entire order to be produced as is and shipped as soon as possible. But in the meantime, you discovered a minor design flaw. Fixing the flaw, any flaw, would cost your company money, and the product has already been accepted as is, so why not ship it just the way it is? On the other hand, you feel it might be unethical to ship a product you know to have a design problem. This could be a values question. Okay, what do the stakeholders each value? Your company values getting its product out the door quickly and cost effectively, but it also, if it's a good company, it stakes its reputation on the quality of its products, and it might value fixing the flaw and showing its customers that it believes in the quality of its products. On the other hand, there are the customers. They value you being honest with them. They value a good quality product. They accepted the product, but for you to communicate to them that there is this minor flaw and you're willing to fix it would go a huge step toward improving your relationship with your client. So I think this one's a pretty the answer here is that you have to communicate to the client what this flaw is that you found, and let the client decide whether they want to pay a little bit more for a fixed product or keep taking the shipments as is. Okay, finally, your company makes many products in many areas of expertise, and they need a PE to sign off on a new product outside your area of expertise. But all the engineers with experience in that field are backlogged, and it would cost too much to hire an outside consultant. The product manager asks you to inspect and sign off on the product because A, you're a PE, B, he remembers from your transcript that you took a class in this field way back in college, and C, you know the engineers who designed the product, and even though they aren't PEs yet, they're still in their 2 or 3 years of early experience, they're good, competent people, and you know that they would only make a good product. This one clearly comes down to a code of ethics question. There's nothing immoral about what the company is trying to do here, except that it's trying to cut corners a little bit with having you certify something that you're not technically qualified to do. It's outside your area of expertise. And the NSPE code very clearly says that engineers shall not act outside their area of competence and expertise. So you just have to say no to this one and help the company find a consultant or somebody in the company who can sign off on this product. Okay, so that concludes my presentation on engineering ethics. Your assignment for following up on this is to develop a scenario in your field of engineering that you want to analyze using my 7-step method, okay, and see if you can find an ethical, come up with something that's ethically questionable, and then see if you can find what ethics it violates, which of my 7 steps it seems to violate, and then see if on that step 7 you can find a way to engineer a better solution, an ethical solution to that dilemma. Okay, hope you learned something from this presentation. Good luck with your engineering career.